He walked into the courtroom expecting justice, but instead, he brought arrogance, entitlement, and a blatant refusal to respect the woman who held the gavel. She was no ordinary judge. Her calm eyes hid years of battles fought in silence, and her presence commanded authority. Yet in that moment, the billionaire's defiance wasn't just against her, it was against everything she stood for. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it made history. And the way it unfolded will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, race, and justice. Judge Mariah Carter was known for her poise, a calm force, in a room where tempers often flared. Every morning, she walked into the courthouse not just as a judge, but as one of the few black women to ever hold such a position in her state. Years of dedication had earned her respect from many, but not all. Outside the walls of the courtroom, she lived a quiet life, cherishing mornings with her coffee, phone calls to her mother, and weekend visits to her old neighborhood where kids still looked up to her as proof that dreams were possible. This day began no differently. The docket was full, and the air carried the usual hum of lawyers shuffling papers and clerks checking schedules. But as the doors opened and a billionaire real estate tycoon stepped inside, something shifted. His eyes scanned the room, pausing on her with a smirk that felt like a challenge. She had seen that look before, the kind that dismissed her authority before she even spoke. Mariah didn't know it yet, but this case wouldn't just test the law. It would test her dignity, her resolve, and the quiet strength she'd carried her whole life. The room was about to witness a clash far bigger than the case on the docket. The moment the bailiff called the court to order, all eyes turned toward the billionaire. Instead of rising, as tradition and respect demanded, he remained, seated, leaning back in his chair as if the entire room existed for his amusement. The murmur of the crowd grew, but he didn't flinch. His attorney shifted uncomfortably, whispering something urgent, yet the man waved it off. Judge Mariah Carter's expression didn't change, but inside, her pulse quickened. She had dealt with difficult defendants before, those who tested her, patients who sought to undermine her authority. But this was different. This was not mere arrogance. It was a deliberate statement. His posture said it all. You don't deserve my respect. As the proceedings began, the tension thickened. He interrupted the clerk, rolled his eyes at her rulings, and muttered under his breath just loud enough for those nearby to hear. The insults weren't direct, but they were coated in a venom she recognized well, the subtle but cutting language, used to diminish her, to remind her that in his world, people like her were expected to stay in their place. Every time she addressed him, his gaze would drift lazily to the ceiling or linger on his phone, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. The gallery watched, unsure whether to look away or witness what felt like the unraveling of courtroom order. Then came the moment that set the room on edge. As she delivered a ruling on a critical motion, he laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, but a cold, sharp burst of mockery. It sliced through the air, silencing the tapping keyboards and shuffling papers. She paused, her voice steady, but her heart pounding. In that instant, she knew this was no longer just about the law. This was about something deeper, uglier, and far more personal. Each exchange became a battle, his every move calculated to erode her authority. It was a performance, and the audience, jurors, reporters, even court staff, were being pulled into his act. But what he didn't know was that Mariah had been here before, not in this exact setting, but in countless moments where the weight of prejudice tried to press her down. The hearing moved toward its pivotal point. The next decision she would make could either cement his belief that he could walk over her, or show him, and everyone watching, that she was not someone to underestimate. The air in the room felt electric, the tension so tight it could snap at any moment, and when it did, the world would see just how far he was willing to go, and how far she was willing to stand her ground. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, a smirk plastered across his face, as if daring her to challenge him. Judge Mariah Carter's gavel struck the bench, once, twice, cutting through the murmurs in the courtroom. "Mr. Langford," she said, her voice firm but measured, "I will remind you, this court demands respect." He didn't flinch. Instead, he folded his arms, leaned forward, and with a voice dripping in contempt said, "Respect? From me? To you?" The words echoed. Not just in the courtroom, but in the space between every breath she took. It wasn't just defiance. It was an open declaration that he did not see her as worthy of the authority her robe symbolized. And, in that moment, the racial undertone was as sharp and clear as broken glass. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters' pens froze. Even the court clerk looked up, wide-eyed. For a fraction of a second, time seemed suspended. The fluorescent lights hummed. The air conditioner clicked on. And in that heavy silence, Mariah felt the weight of every woman, every person of color who had been told they didn't belong in a place of power. She could feel the sting, not from his words alone, but from what they represented. Generations of prejudice condensed into a single poisonous sentence. But instead of shrinking, she sat taller. "You will rise," she said, her voice carrying the force of every trial, every struggle, every door she had pushed open to get here. Langford's smirk faltered. He hesitated, just long enough for the cameras to catch it, before finally pushing his chair back. The sound of it scraping against the floor was almost a confession. He stood, but the battle wasn't over. His eyes locked on hers, not with surrender, but with a silent promise. This wasn't the last time he'd try to break her. And in that tense, unblinking standoff, the courtroom held its breath, waiting to see who would make the next move. The gavel fell for the final time that day, but the echoes seemed to follow Judge Mariah Carter long after the courtroom emptied. Langford's case proceeded according to the law, stripped of the theatrics he had tried to use as a weapon. Yet, the confrontation had already left its mark, not just on her, but on everyone who had witnessed it. She knew this wasn't just about a single man refusing to stand. It was about every silent assumption, every subtle slight, every moment where respect was withheld because of the color of her skin. She had faced them all before, but in that moment, on that public stage, the entire country had seen it too. Outside, the courthouse, the clip was already spreading online. The smirk, the refusal, the unshakable authority in her voice when she told him to rise. Comment sections are filled with outrage, support, denial, and debate. Some saw a judge defending the dignity of her courtroom. Others saw a reminder of how deeply prejudice still lingers, even in the places built to uphold justice. Mariah didn't relish the attention, but she understood the weight of the moment. For some young girls watching the clip, she might be proof that they belonged in spaces others told them were off limits. For others, she might be a challenge to finally confront the biases they carried quietly inside. The truth was undeniable. Racism wasn't always loud. It was often dressed in politeness, wealth, and power. But on that day, it had been called out for what it was. And as she stepped out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, she carried one thought with her. The fight for respect doesn't end with a verdict. It begins every time someone decides not to stay silent. So how many more moments like this will it take before respect is no longer something that has to be demanded, but something freely given?